So let's get the battery level, and for that, as I mentioned, I'll start with Android. So let's go to the Android folder, which is the Android app our Dart and Flutter app will get merged in the end. And there in the app folder, in the source folder, in the main folder, if you drill down into the Java COM folder, if you drill down all the way to the bottom, you'll find this main activity file. And this is now a Java file, and that's important. This means here we write Java code, not Dart. Now, of course, you might not know Java, and I'm also not a Java expert. Now, for this module here, you can simply follow along what I type. And as I said, if you ever are in a situation where you need a certain Java functionality in your app and you find no fitting plugin, well, maybe you find a snippet in some blog post or on Stack Overflow, which you can more or less just copy into your Java code to get the functionality you want and then connect it to Flutter. So even if you're not a Java expert, this knowledge here is still useful because you can get some code to work with your Flutter app, which you otherwise won't be able to. So here in the main activity.java file, we got a class, and that's something we know from Dart. We're extending something, and in the end this here, this onCreate method, this is what runs when our Android application starts, you could say. Now in here, below this generated plugin registrant thing here, you can now set up a new, with the new keyword, method channel. Now important, for this to work, you first of all need to add an import. So let's go up to the imports here and import io.flutter.plugin, not plugins, but plugin, .common.method channel. Add this import here, and with that import added, you unlock this class here. Now imports work a bit different in Java than they do in Dart. You specifically have to import everything you want to use, every class you want to use on its own. And that's what we're doing here. We're importing the method channel class, and where in Dart you created a class just like this, in Java you need to add the new keyword in front of that. So this now creates a new method channel in Java, and you might remember that we also created one in Flutter, so we're establishing that connection. In Flutter, we're creating it to send messages. Here, we're creating it to receive messages. And in there, we have to call getFlutterView. This is a function that should be available here, just like that. The second argument we pass here is our channel identifier. And that, of course, has to be the same identifier as you set up here. So grab this identifier you set up in your Flutter code, this unique identifier, and add it here as a string as well as a second argument to the method channel, because this establishes communication on the channel with this identifier. Now on method channel here, you can call set method call handler. Now this is a method we can call, and this method here, I'll add this here in a new line to make it easier to read, gets another new object, a new object of type method call handler. Whoops. So create a new method call handler with the method call handler class. And for this to be available, you need to add another import based on your Flutter plugin common method channel import. And there we add the method call handler sub import, so to say. So we're importing the method channel here, and then from that package also specifically, in addition, the method call handler. So then we create a new method call handler here, and this actually now is a special syntax in Java here, where we can now add curly braces after this to dynamically override with that add override annotation a method in there. And that's a public void method. Public is a special keyword in Java that makes it clear that this method can be called from outside. You might remember that in Dart you could use an underscore to let everyone know that you don't want it to be called from outside. The equivalent would be private here, and public is the default in Dart, which is why there aren't public or private keywords. So here we'll override a public method which doesn't return anything, and that method will be called onMethodCall, written like this. So this is the end method which will be triggered when an incoming method call is received. And this on-the-fly overriding is simply a feature Java offers here. So here on method call takes two arguments. The first is of type method call, and we can name it call. The second is of type result, and we can name it result. Now we need to import these two classes. The first one is imported from io.flutter.plugin.comment.method call. And then we can also import another one from the method channel import, there the result import. So you have to import this general method call import and this result import here. And with these imports added up there, this here should work. But of course right now it's not doing anything. We just set up the basics. Now we can actually work on the concrete implementation of the code that should fetch us the battery level. And for that we'll first of all have to add more imports to this file. And that's import android.content.context wrapper. And then we have another import from android.content.intent. So these are now all not Flutter specific imports, but from the Android packages themselves. So we have another import that's android.content.intent filter, and we will use all these things we're importing in the code we're about to write, and then I'll explain what they do. We also import android.os.battery manager. You can probably guess what that will help us do. We import android.os.build.version, all capital characters. Then import android.os.build.version_codes, also capital characters there. And import android.os.bundle, like this. And of course you find all this code attached to the last lecture of this module in case you're getting stuck. So with these imports added, let's add a new method outside of this onCreate method, but inside of the main activity class, maybe here. And this will be a private method, which means it can only be called from inside the class, which will return an integer. So Java knows integers as well. And I'll name it getBatteryLevel, but that name is up to you. It doesn't have to be the name you used here in Flutter. So this name here doesn't have to be the same name as you use here. Often it makes sense, but it doesn't have to be the same name. So with that function defined, let's create a new battery level variable and set it to -1 initially, which is basically an invalid battery level as a default. Then I want to check the version thing we're importing here, which lets me find out which version of Android we're running on. And there tap into stk_int. And if that is greater or equal to version codes.lollipop, then I will execute some code. Otherwise, I'll execute some other code. This check is required because getting the battery level simply differs depending on which Android version you're running on. With that, we're checking if we're on a more recent version of Android. If that's the case, we can use a certain code for getting the battery level, and otherwise we'll have to use a workaround code. So let's start with the more recent code. There we create a new battery manager variable, which is of type battery manager, and you should always specify the type here in Java. And then here we can call getSystemService, which is a function that should be globally available. And we want to get access to the battery service here, like this. Should also be available. Now, this can be converted to a battery manager object by adding brackets battery manager in front of it. With it, we have access to the battery manager in the end. Now the battery level can be set equal to battery manager dot get int property battery manager dot battery property capacity. So this code here in the end will give us the current battery level of our device with this battery property constant here, which we're accessing through the battery manager. And with that, we're setting the battery level. That's what's happening here. Now in the else snippet here, I'll write that fallback code. There we create an intent of type intent and then create a new context wrapper around our application context, which we get with getApplicationContext, a globally available function. And then on that, we can call registerReceiver null, and then new intent filter, and then the intent should be action battery changed. And this is in the end a way of getting notified when our battery level changes, and we also get notified when we set this up initially to basically fetch our battery level. Now we can therefore set the battery level variable equal to intent get int extra to retrieve some data from that intent, so from that incoming information package. So get int extra battery manager dot extra underscore level. Second argument here should be -1, which is a fallback value in case we're not able to retrieve that. Times 100 to get the value in readable percentage values. Let me also add brackets around that. And then I'll divide that by intent get int extra battery manager dot extra scale. And here fallback is -1 as well. This will in the end give us a battery level in percentage. And with that, after the if else block, we definitely have a battery level, and if it's just -1 as a fallback, which we can return. So now this is our logic for getting the battery level, and of course there are a lot of Java and Android specifics in there, into which I won't dive here. Now in onMethodCall up there, we wanna listen to that get battery level call and then call this method and return the result. So here I'll check if my incoming call method equals, and now here we need that string identifier we're also using here in Flutter, so get battery level in my case. I'm checking whether that's the incoming call we're getting on this channel. And if that's the case, then I'll get my battery level here by calling get battery level, and that's now this internal method we just defined down there. And if battery level now is not equal to -1, which means we have a valid value, then I'll call result success. Result is this argument we're getting, success and forward battery level, and that will basically pass it on to the Flutter code. Else, if we do have a battery level of -1 or of some other invalid value, then I will call result error to throw an error in my Flutter code. And here we can pass in an identifier like unavailable, and then a message, could not fetch battery level, and that will be forwarded to our Dart and Flutter code as well. Now if we have a different message and not get battery level, then I'll call result not implemented, which will basically also throw an error in the Flutter code, telling the Flutter code that we have no logic for handling this incoming method. Now with that, we should have code that works. Let's quit our running emulator here and do a full restart, and then see whether that works as it should. And I'm actually getting an error because in Dart I always use single quotes for my strings, and there it's fine. In Java you actually need to replace all these single quotes with double quotes. That's a Java specific. Single quotes won't work here for strings like that. And one other error I found is in result error here. We have to pass a third argument as well, but that can just be null here. And now with that, let me try running this on my emulator again. And now this is actually built and shipping to the device. In order to see something there, of course, we have to make sure we call get battery level there. And therefore, in its state, I'll now reach out to get battery level like this. Let's save that and do a full refresh thereafter to let that restart. And now hopefully there we see our battery level change. And we do, to 100. Now that proves that this call works, because on the emulator here we simply have 100 as a battery level. And I also got no error here, so this seems to work. And that is how we can write some native Android code and connect to that from inside our Flutter app. Let's now move on to iOS.